A boy disappeared in the summer of 1981. 2 decades passed without a trace until one day his red windbreaker surfaced in a forgotten locker sealed tight at his old junior high. No one could explain how it got there. The police had long since moved on. The school had gone quiet. But his mother, she never stopped looking. For 22 long years, the truth stayed buried like a whisper sealed behind brick and silence, until someone curious or careless opened a door that was never meant to be touched. Before I begin, thank you for watching my channel. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Your presence matters. It tells me we're remembering these stories together. Now let me take you back to where it all began. It was a dry Friday afternoon in early June, the kind of dusty heat only a Southern California summer could conjure. The sun bleached the sidewalks, and the air was heavy with the scent of asphalt and sunscreen. 14-year-old Jaden Moore stepped out of Edison Middle School, his books wedged under one arm, and a flyer for Galaxy Spot Arcade peeking from the back pocket of his jeans. His red windbreaker zipped all the way to his chin, clashed against the sweltering air, but Jaden never cared. His mother Emma had begged him not to wear that jacket when it was hot out. But Jaden didn't listen. "It's not just a jacket, Mom," he'd once said. And it wasn't. She bought it for him the night he brought home a first-place ribbon from the district science fair. He wore it like a badge of honor. Somehow that jacket became a time capsule holding tight to one of the proudest days of his life. That day, like so many before, Jaden had planned to stop by the arcade for half an hour. Just 30 minutes of pixelated alien wars and joystick clicks before heading home. He had done it 100 times. But this time he never came back. By 6 o'clock, the house was too quiet. Emma paced from the living room to the kitchen, her eyes darting to the front window. She imagined Jaden's lanky frame coming up the driveway, his red jacket bouncing in rhythm with his eager steps. By 7, she was dialing neighbors. By 8, she was on the line with the police. "I need to report my son missing," she told the dispatcher, her voice tight but composed. "Jaden Moore, 14. He didn't come home from school." There was a pause on the line. Then came the reply. "Ma'am, boys his age. They wander sometimes. Maybe he's at a friend's place." "No," Emma said, almost before the woman had finished speaking. "He doesn't do that. He's never late. He always comes straight home." An officer finally arrived around 10:15 p.m. He looked young, white, like someone still figuring out where to park the cruiser. His notepad barely moved as Emma listed the details: red jacket, khaki pants, sneakers with a blue stripe. "Sometimes kids just need to blow off steam," he said, almost like a shrug. "He'll probably walk in by morning." Emma's jaw clenched. "He's not a runaway. He was supposed to help me cook dinner. He never misses dinner." The officer gave a polite nod, promised to file a report, then closed his notebook and left with a casual, "Let us know if he turns up." That night, Emma didn't sleep. The porch light stayed on. Jaden's plate sat untouched on the counterfork and napkin, ready like a silent vigil. Outside, the wind kicked soda cans down the gutter, and the neighborhood dogs barked at nothing. Every noise sent Emma rushing to the window. But it was never him. By morning, she was already on the phone with the school. The secretary's voice on the other end of the line sounded groggy, like she'd just woken up from a nap she didn't mean to take. "Jaden Moore. I think he was marked present yesterday. Maybe he went to hang with some friends?" "I'm not asking for guesses," Emma snapped, her patience fraying. "I'm asking if anyone saw him leave." There was a beat of silence, then a hesitant reply. "Well, someone did say he got called to the main office during last period, but that would be in the logbook. I want that logbook checked. You'll need to speak with Principal Dorsey about that. He's not in on Saturdays." Emma hung up mid-sentence and drove straight to Lincoln Junior High. She pounded on the front office door until a janitor cracked it open, mop in hand. "Principal's not here, ma'am." he told her gently. "Come back Monday." But Emma didn't leave. She walked the perimeter of the school for hours, pacing the sidewalk like a woman waiting for the bricks to confess a secret. She stopped every student she saw, flashing Jaden's photo. Some shook their heads, eyes downcast. One girl thought she'd seen him near the principal's office. Another remembered him walking alone along the south wing toward the old staircase at the back. That didn't sit right. Jaden always exited through the front gate. On Monday, Emma was back before the first bell rang. She demanded to see Dorsey. He met her in the hallway, arms folded like a gatekeeper, lips pursed into a smile that held no warmth. "I understand you're upset, Ms. Moore, but there was no incident reported. And just to be clear, your son left school grounds without notifying anyone. We're not responsible once students leave the property." "I was told he was called to your office," Emma said, locking eyes with him. "I have no record of that," he answered flatly. "I want to see the logbook. That's not available to the public." Emma's hands trembled at her sides, but her voice didn't waver. "Then I'm calling the police. Because if he was called here and never came home, you may be the last adult who saw him." Dorsey's face turned to stone. "I suggest you leave the premises." When she didn't move, security was summoned. They told her she was creating a disturbance. She walked out with fire in her chest and humiliation clinging to her skin. That same week, Emma canvassed the town with flyers in hand. She posted them on telephone poles behind diner booths, at church bulletin boards, and bus shelters. She taped one beside the claw machine at Galaxy Spot. The local news said they'd look into it. No reporter ever came. She asked if they could put Jaden's face on the evening news and was told, "That's for confirmed abductions only." The police refused to issue an alert. "You need proof of foul play." One officer told her, voice thick with bureaucratic indifference. "My son is the proof," Emma whispered, tears burning down her cheeks. Days melted into weeks. No one found Jaden's red windbreaker. His savings account stayed untouched. Not a single call, not a sighting, not a whisper of where he might be. And still the official record described him as a possible runaway. Emma left his room untouched. The ribbon from his science fair still hung on a thumbtack near the window. His last comic book lay half-read, folded open on the bed. She refused to call it grief. Not yet. Because deep in her bones, she believed something had happened inside that school, and someone out there knew exactly what. The days following Jaden's disappearance weren't filled with search teams, camera crews, or community vigils. There were no helicopters slicing the air above Los Angeles, no breaking news segments or candlelit marches. There was only Emma, bone-tired, relentless, and drowning in silence. Every morning, she laced her shoes and walked the sidewalks her son used to tread. She asked deli owners, gas station clerks, street sweepers, anyone who might have seen a boy in a red jacket. Most people shook their heads. A few murmured sympathy. One man asked, "You sure he didn't just run off with a girl?" "He's 14, Emma snapped. "He was supposed to be home for dinner." She stopped going to her job in the school cafeteria. They could serve meatloaf without her, but no one else was fighting for her son. She called every officer whose number she had. When calls stopped being returned, she drove to the precinct with a spiral-bound notebook of names, times, and places. She brought in one of Jaden's old shirts and begged for scent dogs. They said none were available. "I'll pay," she offered. "We don't do that," they replied. That same week, she met Officer Marcus Hill, the rookie. He looked barely out of high school himself and held his notepad like it might combust. Emma didn't wait for pleasantries. "Did you talk to the principal?" she asked. "He was called to the office before he vanished." "I haven't spoken to him yet," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "But I've got a meeting scheduled." "Then why are you here?" she snapped. "He might have been the last person to see my boy alive." He had no answer. Emma gave him everything: Jaden's dental records, the names of close friends, even the name of a student who said they saw him near the back wing. Marcus scribbled it all down and promised someone would follow up. No one ever did. A week later, a senior officer told her there was no clear sign of criminal activity. "He probably just took off," the man said. "Didn't you say he was into sci-fi and games?" Maybe he went looking for an adventure. Emma blinked, stunned. He doesn't even ride the city bus alone without telling me. He's not reckless. He's careful. He's good. He's smart. The officer shrugged and leaned back in his chair. You'd be surprised what teens get up to. By now, the sun had faded the flyers to pale ghosts. Emma reprinted them weekly, carrying a staple gun in one hand and a Ziploc full of fresh copies in the other. She returned to the newspaper office photo and handwritten plea in hand. The editor barely looked up. We don't usually publish missing cases, he said, unless there's confirmed foul play. Emma leaned in across the desk, her voice trembling with fury. So my son doesn't matter unless someone finds his body. The man blinked, caught off guard. That's not what I said. It's what you meant, she shot back cold and clear. The interview never aired. At church that Sunday, the pastor asked the congregation to keep Jaden in their prayers. A few families from the neighborhood brought casseroles and helped with flyers for a while. But soon, one by one, they drifted away. Even parents from the school began to avoid eye contact. Some seemed to treat her like she carried bad luck. Others just didn't want trouble knocking at their own doors. People didn't want to believe that a child could vanish and the world wouldn't lift a finger. By the second week, Emma marched back to McKinley Middle School. She stood outside the front office like a soldier on duty, eyes locked on the entrance. When Principal Frank Dorsey strolled up, pressed slacks, stiff tie keys, swinging from his belt loop, Emma stepped straight into his path. I need 5 minutes, she said firmly. He sighed, already annoyed. Ms. Moore, I've explained this. You haven't explained anything, she snapped. Jaden was called to your office the day he disappeared. That's not just a coincidence. Dorsey glanced down the hallway, then lowered his voice. There's no documentation showing he was summoned. None. Then prove it, Emma said, daring him. Show me the logbook. That's internal school property. I can't just hand it out. I'm not asking for a copy. I'm asking you to look me in the eye and tell me my son wasn't in your office that day. His eyes faltered. We have hundreds of kids coming through here. I don't remember every face. Jaden wasn't just any kid, Emma replied. He's my son. Dorsey didn't answer. Instead, he sidestepped her with a tight, if there's something to report, the proper authorities will follow up. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like nothing had happened. That night, Emma stood alone in her son's bedroom, eyes fixed on the desk where his notebook still sat, pages filled with equations, margins scribbled with stars and rockets. His latest comic book lay open to a splash page, a hero stranded on a distant planet, trying to find a way back home. She imagined Jaden at the arcade, smiling as he fed quarters into the cabinet shoulders, hunched in deep concentration. He wasn't a runaway. He wasn't a ghost. He was a child, and the system had decided he wasn't worth saving. 6 months passed. Jaden's case was quietly marked inactive. A clerk told Emma she could file for a death certificate if she needed closure. She refused. There was no memorial, no funeral, no grave, just an empty seat at dinner, a jacket that never made it home, and a mother no one believed anymore. By spring 2003, McKinley Middle had become a shell of itself, boarded-up windows, graffiti, scrawled across crumbling brick entire classrooms, rotting from the inside. The city had approved plans to tear it down and replace it with low-income housing. Demolition crews were sent in to gut the building's scrap metal, copper wiring, anything of value. What they didn't expect to find was a memory buried behind steel and silence hidden from time, but not from the one woman who had never stopped waiting to be heard. Henry Banks hadn't stepped foot in those halls in over 15 years. He was nearly 70 now, slower in step, but still strong in the shoulders. When a contractor called and asked if he could help sort through basement junk, old desks, busted lockers, broken furniture, he nearly said no. But something tugged at him. Maybe guilt, maybe something deeper. He showed up before sunrise, before the heavy machinery stirred to life. To his surprise, the old master key still turned in the lock. The air hit him like a wave, musty thick with mildew and the faded scent of floor wax. He walked past the cafeteria, the library, the dusty trophy case stripped of its plaques. And then he descended the back stairwell to the basement, the part of the school no one liked to visit. The light flickered overhead, buzzing faintly like a memory gasping for air. Henry had always hated the rear wing of the lower level. Back in the early 80s, they'd sealed it off, blaming mold. No one questioned it much. Now he stood before a line of rusted lockers. He pried one open with a crowbar, the metal groaning. Most were empty. A few held sneakers crusted with age, dog-eared textbooks, a pom-pom stiff with time. And then, in the last row near the wall that had been bricked shut, he found it a locker with a loose rear panel. He wedged his fingers into the crack. The wood backing softened with decay gave way. Something tumbled out. It was a red windbreaker. He froze. The color was faded but unmistakable. The fabric, stiff with time, still held its shape. He turned it over, hands trembling, and there, inside the collar, was a name written in permanent marker. Though now faint, the letters were still legible. Jaden M. Henry sat down on an old stool, breath caught in his throat. That name had lived in the corners of memory in whispers no one dared speak. He remembered the missing posters, the crying mother, the silence that followed. When they sealed that section off, no one had asked questions. Just a few memos, health codes, nothing else. Henry rose slowly, holding the jacket like it might shatter. And then he walked out. That same afternoon, Renee Jackson, an investigative journalist known for reopening cold cases, was checking her inbox. She had grown up just a few blocks from McKinley. She remembered the posters taped to the telephone pole outside her window, the boy with kind eyes and a red jacket. There was no subject line, just an email, a single image. A message. Found this in a sealed locker today. I think it belonged to the boy who went missing. Figured someone should know. Renee dropped everything. She dialed the number immediately. Within the hour, she was behind the wheel, speeding toward his address voice recorder in one pocket, camera in the other, heart pounding with purpose. Henry didn't hold anything back. He told her how he'd been the school janitor during Jaden's last year, how there were hushed whispers about something strange in the basement, how Principal Dorsey had ordered that entire wing sealed off just months after the boy vanished. No official statement, no inspection, no questions. Nobody wanted to dig. Henry said, voice heavy. Not the board, not the cops, not the reporters. Everyone just moved on. Renee documented everything, tight clinical photos of the jacket, the name stitched inside the decaying locker, and the wall that had entombed it. When she asked who had keys to the basement back then, Henry hesitated. Just a handful of us, he admitted. But the only one with keys to every lock in that building was Dorsey. That night, Renee hit publish. Jacket found in demolished school. May belong to teen missing since 1981, the headline cut like a blade. The article featured Jaden's photo, a high-res shot of the collar name tag, and a grainy interview clip from a decades-old broadcast of Emma Moore begging the world to listen. And the internet did what the city never had. Within 24 hours, the story caught fire. Thousands of shares, comments flooding in. The local precinct was inundated with calls. Emma Moore's name trended across platforms decades too late, but finally rising. Detective Marcus Hill, now silver-haired and just months from retirement, was summoned to consult. The moment he saw the jacket photo, his gut dropped like a stone. He had filed the original missing person report. He had looked that woman in the eyes twice and told her her son probably just needed space. He never imagined those words would echo for decades. But now the case was reopened. Not quietly, not temporarily, formally. Marcus didn't protest. He remembered her, the woman with steel in her spine and sorrow in her voice. He remembered her clutching that photo, the one of Jaden in his red jacket, and he remembered thinking back then that she was just another mother, refusing to accept what they all assumed the boy had run away. That was the story they told themselves, because it was easier than asking the questions that might unearth something worse. Now, 22 years later, the questions were clawing their way back up. Emma sat in the same precinct interview room, same faded walls, same hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She looked older, of course, her shoulders thinner, her hair now dusted with gray, her face worn with years of silence. But her eyes were unchanged, still sharp, still wary, still watching. "I never forgot your face," she said, her voice low, not cruel, just honest. "I prayed I'd never have to see it again." Marcus cleared his throat. "Mrs. Moore, I just want to say I don't need an apology," she said, cutting in. "I need you to do your job. This time." He nodded. "I intend to." He placed the photos of the jacket in front of her. She didn't even glance down. "That's his," she said, sure as the sunrise. I stitched his name inside myself. He kept losing jackets, so I started marking all of them. "We're running DNA samples," Marcus said. "From the collar, the seams, hoping to find something conclusive." Emma's lips tightened. "You don't have to find something. You already did." Meanwhile, Renee Jackson wasn't slowing down. She buried herself in microfilm archives at the public library, spending her days tracking down anyone who'd walked the halls of McKinley from 1979 to 1983. Most alumni couldn't recall much teachers' classes, assignments all lost to time, but a few remembered the rumors, stories of a so-called reflection room. They'd heard it whispered, a room in the basement where problem kids were sent, sometimes for detention, sometimes for longer. No clocks, no windows, just walls. Some said they'd been there, said it was too dark to remember anything clearly. Others didn't want to talk at all. Renee dug deeper. She uncovered school board meeting notes from 1982, brief mention of a temporary closure of lower-level facilities due to environmental hazards. No follow-up, no inspection report, just a vanishing line in city records. Then she found something stranger. A 1981 disciplinary report partially redacted. A handful of students listed for unauthorized absence from class the same week Jaden disappeared. Most names were marked plainly, but next to Jaden's was a handwritten note, different ink, different penmanship sent to office, escorted by staff. No mention of who escorted him. No indication he returned to class. Just that one cryptic line. Renee took it straight to Marcus. He made a formal request for archived security access logs if any were still intact. What he found was limited, but enough to rattle the bones of a cold case long buried. Only 3 people ever held master keys to the entire school: the janitor, the vice principal, and Principal Frank Dorsey. Henry Banks had already come forward. The vice principal had died back in '97. That left Dorsey. He too was long gone, but the paper trail he left behind was not. Marcus submitted a formal request to access the sealed personnel records stored in the district's central archive. It took over a week for the red tape to untangle. When the manila folders finally landed on his desk, yellowed and brittle from time, Marcus opened them slowly like a man disarming a bomb. And what he found chilled him. There were multiple complaints, anonymous, typed, or handwritten, submitted by staff over the years. Allegations of misconduct, inappropriate behavior, verbal intimidation, unsupervised disciplinary sessions with male students behind closed doors. Each report had been stamped in red ink, reviewed. No signatures, no follow-up, no disciplinary action, just quiet burial beneath layers of bureaucracy. Marcus called Renee. "We found sealed complaints against Dorsey," he told her. "He was never investigated, not once. No interviews, no statements, just silence." Renee didn't miss a beat. He had too much power, she said, and everyone was too afraid to challenge it. When Marcus told Emma, she barely blinked. She just listened, then asked one question. "Is that room still there?" No one knew for sure. The entire basement wing had been sealed decades ago, hidden behind fresh drywall and rusted lockers. But if Jaden's jacket had survived, maybe something else had too. The following day, under full city approval and accompanied by a forensics unit, Marcus returned to McKinley Middle School. Demolition crews paused their work. The air inside was thick with dust, the kind that clung to your clothes and didn't shake off easy. Marcus led them down the corridor Henry had described, the rear hallway behind the old locker bank. One dim bulb flickered overhead like a heartbeat. "Right here," Marcus said, pointing to the far row. The workers began dismantling the corroded lockers one by one. Behind them, the wall didn't match the rest of the school. It was patched hastily with uneven brick and smeared mortar. Sloppy work. A rush job. "You sure about this?" the supervisor asked, crowbar in hand. "Open it," Marcus said. 20 minutes of pounding later, the last layer crumbled away and revealed a door. Steel, rust-pitted. No label, no handle. It groaned open like a dying breath. Inside, the air was still and thick, saturated with mildew and something unspoken. A single metal chair sat bolted to the center of the floor. Torn cloth straps dangled from its arms and seat. Pencil marks covered one wall, scrawls, tallies, endless circles. In the corner, a few soaked pages from a school workbook curled with age and rot. The forensics team moved quickly, snapping photos, logging samples, swabbing every surface. No blood, no bones. But something had happened in that room. Marcus couldn't speak. His throat felt raw. Because this wasn't just a basement. This was a cage. A cold, hidden box built by a school, locked by a man and buried by decades of indifference. A prison for a child. A secret kept until now. And the only person who'd kept knocking, his mother. The photos from the sealed room spread like wildfire. Renee Jackson's next piece hit harder than ever. The boy in the basement. The school that buried him twice. Grainy images of the rusted chair, the scribbled wall, the suffocating windowless space. The article went viral within hours. Comment sections lit up with outrage. Readers who had once dismissed Jaden Moore as a runaway were now forced to face what had always been there, that a 14-year-old boy had been imprisoned beneath a public school while the adults above him chose to look away. Emma Moore refused to look at the photos. She didn't have to. She had lived with worse in her mind for 22 years. The silence, the gaslighting, the slow, brutal erasure of her son's name from every institution meant to protect him. That had been its own form of cruelty. Now she had what she needed. Proof. He hadn't run away. He hadn't disappeared into the night. He had been taken, held, hidden, forgotten. What shattered her wasn't the revelation, it was the proximity. Her baby had been only blocks from home, inches behind a wall, and no one had listened when she begged them to look. The forensic team worked methodically. DNA samples were lifted from the straps, the chair, the wall. Days passed. But even before the lab results returned, there was no more doubt. Fingerprints, faint but intact, matched Jaden's school health form from 1980. 2 decades later, the dust had remembered him. One officer stood frozen in front of the wall, his eyes tracing the chaos of pencil marks etched into the brick. Some were tallies, days, hours. Each line scratched, deep, relentless. Circles layered over and over as though the child had run out of ways to measure time. And in the bottom corner, beneath layers of grime and despair, were faint letters, slanted, shaky. JM repeated. Again and again. And then, almost hidden behind a crack in the wall, 5 final words. Mom will find me. Detective Marcus Hill stood frozen, jaw clenched so tight it ached. He didn't shed a tear, but something deep within him cracked open. 22 years ago, he had watched Emma Moore walk out of the precinct with nothing but a generic pamphlet and a quiet warning not to stir things up. Now the noise she was told to quiet had become a roar echoing through every hallway of justice. That night he called her himself. She answered before the first ring finished. "We found writing on the wall," he said. She didn't speak. There were initials, he continued. "Yours, and something else." He paused. He wrote, "Mom will find me." The line broke her. Emma dropped the phone and let her sobs fill the kitchen. The grief she had swallowed for decades crashed out of her in waves. For all those years they told her to let it go, to move on, to heal. But even in the darkest room, silenced and unseen, her son had held on to her. He believed in her. He believed she would come. And she had, just not in time. Word of the discovery moved quickly. Local officials called in the state. The school district issued a public statement expressing shock and sorrow over the disturbing revelations. But Emma didn't care for statements. She wanted truth. She wanted names. Renee gave her both. Through a district whistleblower, she obtained sealed documents from the early 1980s, confirming what she'd suspected all along. Multiple complaints had been filed against Principal Frank Dorsey, accusations of locking boys in his office for behavioral corrections of children, leaving shaken silent one, even returning home with bruises, and never showing up to school again. None of the reports had gone anywhere. Quiet investigations, no consequences. Dorsey retired with accolades in '93. He died in '99. There would be no trial, no admission, no justice. But the silence didn't last. Former students began stepping forward. One of them, a man named Curtis Bell, now in his 40s, spoke to Renee. He remembered that room. He'd been in 7th grade, skipped a class. Dorsey found him and said they needed to have a talk, led him downstairs, locked him inside that cold, dark space. Curtis had screamed. No one came. I only went in once, he said, but I've never forgotten how that felt. Others reached out, some anonymously. Some couldn't remember Jaden, but they remembered that room. The chill, the silence, the way the darkness seemed to breathe. 1 week later, Emma received a plain envelope, no return address, inside a single folded comic book page, the same issue Jaden had been reading the week he vanished. Taped to it was a note handwritten and trembling. He didn't deserve that. None of us did. I'm sorry. She held the page like a pulse, like it was Jaden's heartbeat still whispering through the paper. The city council held an emergency meeting. The room was packed to the walls. Renee stood and read an excerpt from her article. Then Emma rose. She said only one thing: you were supposed to protect him. And then she sat. No one argued. No one looked her in the eye. The school board voted unanimously to establish a permanent memorial on the land where McKinley Middle once stood. A community garden would be planted. A bench would mark the site, engraved with the words Jaden had etched into the wall, "Mom will find me." But no tribute, no plaque, no speech could rewrite what had been stolen. Jaden was still gone, still missing, still hers. They held the vigil on a brisk October Friday as the sun dipped low over the empty lot where the school had once cast its shadow. Nothing remained but flat dirt-tangled rebar, reaching from the ground like broken ribs, and the faded footprint of the basement that had kept her son hidden for over 20 years. A few rows of folding chairs had been set up around a simple wooden display table. Atop it, enclosed in glass, rested Jaden's red windbreaker, cleaned, preserved, but still creased from decades spent crumpled behind a wall. His name, faint but visible, lingered on the inside collar, Jaden M. The zipper was rusted, one sleeve torn, but Emma had known it the moment she saw it. No hesitation. She sat in the front row, hands folded, a dark coat, a single strand of pearls she hadn't worn since the day he vanished. Her hair was tucked beneath a scarf. Her eyes had not left the case since she arrived. Around her, people murmured. Neighbors, old classmates, retired teachers, reporters, pastors, city officials, strangers who had read Renee's story and couldn't stay away. Some carried candles, some held signs, some simply stood in silence, hands deep in their pockets, unable to meet Emma's gaze. And still she didn't look away. Detective Marcus Hill stood off to the side, uncertain where he fit into the picture. He wore his best gray suit and a thick wool coat, the collar flipped up against the bite of the October wind. For a long time, he simply watched Emma, trying to summon the courage to approach. "Mrs. Moore," he said softly as he stepped forward. She didn't turn. "I came because I needed to say something." Still, her gaze held steady on the glass case. He cleared his throat. "You were right, about everything. About him not running away, about the school, about that room. You were right, and we all looked the other way." His voice cracked. "I did too." Emma blinked slowly. "I was just out of the academy. I didn't question the chain of command. I followed the lead of officers who treated you like background noise. I told myself I was protecting my career. But really, I was losing something much more important." Finally, Emma turned to face him, not with anger, just with the quiet clarity of someone who had long since stopped needing validation. "You didn't believe me," she said. Marcus shook his head. "No, I didn't." She nodded almost absently, but he did. Marcus furrowed his brow. "Who, my son?" She said, her voice laced with grief and reverence. He believed I'd find him, even when they closed that door, even when they left him in that darkness. He scratched my name into the wall. He counted the days, because he knew I wouldn't stop. Her throat tightened, and I didn't. Marcus swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Her reply was a whisper. So am I. Renee Jackson stepped up to the podium next. She held a small note card but never once looked at it. Her eyes swept across the crowd as the setting sun bathed the empty school lot in amber light. We are not here to celebrate, she began. There is no justice in this. No peace. Only truth. And it took 22 years to unearth that truth from beneath concrete silence and shame. She paused, letting the weight settle. I was 10 years old when Jaden Moore's face stared back at me from a telephone pole on my way home from school. I remember the photo. I remember how the paper curled in the rain. I remember how people stopped talking about him, how the city moved on. She turned to Emma. But you didn't. You never moved on. And because you didn't, the truth came back. Heads bowed, tears were wiped, hands reached for candles or for each other. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood in silence. When the speeches ended, Emma was the first to rise. She walked slowly, each step pressing into the dry earth toward the glass case that held her son's red windbreaker. The only sound was the soft crunch of her heels against dirt and gravel. She stood for a moment, taking in the frayed seams, the torn cuff, the rusted zipper. The fabric still bore the folds of 2 lost decades. From her purse, she withdrew a carefully folded piece of paper, the comic book page she had received anonymously. The one with Jaden's favorite hero flying into the stars. The one that carried the note he didn't deserve that. None of us did. I'm sorry. With gentle hands, she placed it inside the glass beside the jacket, then laid her palm against the case. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Later, after the crowd had thinned and night had fully settled, Emma walked home alone. The neighborhood had changed: fresh paint, new families, sleeker cars parked on cleaner curbs, but the sidewalk still cracked in the same places Jaden used to leap across as a boy. The porch light still flickered like it always had. The screen door still moaned on its hinges. Inside, the photo still waited on the mantel. The same one she'd used on the missing flyers. That shy school portrait, the red jacket zipped up high, the wide, hopeful eyes that had yet to learn how cruel the world could be. She sat in the quiet of her living room, hands folded in her lap once more. Earlier, Marcus had asked her if she felt justice had been done. She hadn't answered. Because what does justice look like for a child bricked into silence? For a mother forced to scream into a void for half her life? There had been no arrests, no trial. The man most responsible had died praised, pensioned and untouched. The district issued an apology. A bronze plaque would go up at the youth center. A cold case fund would bear Jaden's name. But none of that brought him home. None of it erased the silence. Still, something had shifted. People saw him now. They remembered. They said his name aloud again. And deep in that rusted, unholy room, a space he never should have entered, Jaden had believed in her. And she had found him. Not in time, but in truth. And sometimes in a world like this, that's the only ending we're given.